Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well and nicely rested. I think some people are still, yes, struggling to wake up. We hope a warm welcome to those of you who have joined us online, and welcome to the second day of the RESISTIRÉ final event. We've had a very short but intense day yesterday with an inspiring keynote speech, inviting us to recognize the better stories where they are, reminding about the importance of funding also to achieve inclusive crisis responses. We had an incredible panel too about feminist solidarity in times of crisis. And today we'll be looking at three other panels. We'll be having 3 panels. So the first one is on digital transition, beyond connection, caring for an inclusive digital transition. Secondly, we'll be looking at healthcare, bringing back care to healthcare. And last but not least, we'll be concluding, before concluding the conference, we'll be looking into the policy support towards inclusive crisis. So as a few reminders, we have our session is streamed online, but questions will only be taken from the in-person participants. But we encourage you to share the information, share what's going on social media if you are active on social media. And without further ado, I'll leave the floor to Sharula Sanaku. Sharula is a senior research fellow at the Center for Diversity Policy Research and Practice at Oxford Brookes University, and partner in RESISTIRÉ. On to you.
Thank you, Colette. Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see you all here. So today, this panel is about digitalization. And of course, as you know, digitalization has been a key issue during the pandemic, and actually has been an important theme that has come up, and we have focused in RESISTIRÉ project. What was quite interesting with digitalization that has affected a range of activities across healthcare, education, public services, and we have really seen how many activities have been undertaken during the pandemic due to digitalization, like online schooling, telework, or digital public services. But at RESISTIRÉ, we looked at digitalization from an inequality lens, from an intersectional approach. And unsurprisingly, we did find there has been a kind of ambivalent dynamics of digitalization and outcomes of digitalization. So we kind of took notice of digital inequalities, of existing inequalities being exacerbated, but also new inequalities being created. But there are also positive signs. And we did find, for example, public services being streamlined, and in some cases became more accessible to specific groups. And civil society is actually being able to use some of the digital tools and technologies to support vulnerable groups and mitigate social exclusion. And we will see some examples today in this session from some of our panelists. So this session actually brings together a range of stakeholders from civil society organizations and public sector that would actually help us reflect on this ambivalent character of digitalization, but also discuss how we should approach digitalization with an inclusive lens. So we want to understand how we can approach digitalization, especially considering voices and experiences that have been forgotten, that have been silenced, or have not really been considered. So this session is going to be structured in 3 parts. The first part is going to be with Roberto, who is our colleague in RESISTIRÉ project, and is going to present the findings of the project just to set the scene. The second part is about innovative solutions on digitalization. We'll have 2 particular cases, 2 particular examples from panelists that will talk about how they supported vulnerable groups and how they mitigate social exclusion. And the third part is going to be a panel discussion with all the speakers that will help us reflect on this ambivalent character of digitalization, but also reflect on kind of intersectional challenges, intersectional inequalities, priorities, but also practices to take forward. So I think before we go with Roberto, we're going to start with narratives, two narratives that are in relation to digitalization that were collected as part of the RESISTIRÉ project, just to show a bit of the experience of digitalization on the ground.
I'm a 38-year-old Iranian woman who came to Sweden as an asylum seeker 2 years ago. I live with my husband and my teenage son. We had a good life in Iran. I worked as an architect and we had a nice house, a nice car, everything. But because I voiced my opinions about religion, it wasn't safe for me to stay there. I had to leave very suddenly. Shortly after we arrived in Sweden, the migration agency offered us accommodation in a small town. When we moved there, I was happy to hear an adult education association offered free Swedish classes for asylum seekers. But I only got to attend these classes for 1 week before all classes were cancelled due to COVID. They said I could study using WhatsApp, but that didn't work for me. I think I understood maybe 20% of the online classes. Not being able to learn Sweden was stressful. Access to internet was another obstacle. Every month, we bought 200 minutes of phone credit and 3 gigabytes of data each. That costs 300 Swedish krona, which is a big part of the 5,000 Swedish krona, approximately 500 euros, we get monthly. My son had to do online classes, and once he ran out of data during a lesson, I called a migration agency for help. They put me on hold, and after 15 minutes, my phone credit ran out.
My name is Inga. I'm 28 years old. I have a severe disability, cerebral palsy, and I can hardly control my legs. I can stand up only with someone's help. I can move only independently with the help of a wheelchair, and I'm in need of full care. For me, nothing changed during the pandemic. I worked remotely before the pandemic and continue to do so during it. No changes whatsoever. I lived as I always had. I mean, we experienced quarantine every winter, like now, snow everywhere, and that's it. I'm in quarantine because I cannot leave the house. It's not easy to plow through the snow with a wheelchair. A lot of conferences, seminars, and discussions I was interested in went online during the pandemic. This was a huge plus for me because it was much more convenient. I could just turn them on whenever I had time. I did not need to go anywhere. I feel like I participated in and listened to more online events than I would have if I needed to attend them physically. Another area where the pandemic had a positive effect for me is healthcare. It became possible to take care of everything remotely, which was not the case previously. Now it's a matter of a phone call. All prescriptions and all consultations are being done remotely. This has helped a lot.
Right. So now we're going to start the first part of the session with Roberto Cippin, who is a researcher from the Institute of Sociology at the Czech Academy of Sciences, and he was leading the policy fieldwork in RESISTIRÉ project. Roberto, the floor is yours.
I have to change my picture, I think. No, yes. So I'm here trying to explain you why we decided to bring the topic of digital inclusion in a project related to gender inequalities and the pandemic. So in this presentation, I will try to discuss this, going through what we already knew from academic literature and scientific report, trying to explain what we found in terms of issues and opportunities related to the digital transition. And then I will try to put down some recommendations that we developed together with the partner of the project. So as you all know, and we could hear from the narratives, the pandemic created a strong acceleration of the digital transition in different areas of our life, from work to education to healthcare. And what we wanted to understand in our project was what this process meant for vulnerable people. what we already knew from the academic literature, we know that the digital divide is still present. It's not a problem that has been solved. Just to give a number, the 11% of the European area that is the most connected in the world, the 11% of people are not online. So we are talking about 75 million of people that are not online. We know also that digital inequalities are intersectional. Here, I try to give you just an example to explain this. These are the number of people, individuals in the European Union using internet banking. If you see the whole number, we see that it's the 57%. But if we put the lens of sex, we see already difference in the proportion of males and women using the internet banking. And if you add also the lens of age, we see that difference between males and females is much higher. And also we learned during the pandemic that the closure of services related to the lockdown increased the situation of inequalities for vulnerable groups. Libraries and community centers were closed, and usually those are the places that where services for people that are not connected or are not close to digital tools can find support. So what we found, I suggest you to go to this fact sheet that is a product of our project, where you can find more detailed information about what I'm trying to say in 10 minutes. And I will try to divide the findings in issues and opportunities, as I say. So first of all, we realized that public services that moved to digital during the pandemic didn't consider too much situation of vulnerability. I'll give you just an example. In Spain, domestic workers that got unemployed during the pandemic, in order to ask support for their unemployment, had to use mostly online tools, and this created difficulties both related to connection and also language barriers, as you can imagine. We found also that this moving to digital create other barriers to those that were already existing. For instance, children living in camps could not have access to online education. The examples came from Greece and Poland, for instance, because of the lack of tools, because of the lack of connection in the camps where they were living for. So they had no access to a human right like education. And also there are also, let's call them secondary consequences of moving digital. For instance, in the area of education, when the education moved online, and through the narratives and interviews that we had, we realized that people were losing social interactions and the support. You can imagine the social function of school, the control that teacher can have on students about their situation at home, or the food provided at school for poor people. All these things were removed going digital. This brought also to the increase of mental health problems, and also the fact that people were confined at home and had to work or study through digital tools. It's of course a secondary consequence, but the cases of domestic violence increased, and the safe spaces that were school or offices were not used anymore. Many governments tried to mitigate these issues, but the responses were most of the time technocratic. What I mean, that the response was mostly trying to offer technologies and connection, but there were no reflection about the social issues related to these problems. An example, in the Czech Republic, the Inspectorate of Education show that the policy of the government of giving laptop and connection to students and teachers decreased the number of children that had no access to school from 250,000 to 50,000. But at the same time, there were a lot of other people that children that had problem in relation to lack of support from parents or living in rural areas where they could not have connection. We also took a look to the national recovery and resilience plans during our project, and so those documents that every country prepared in order to have finance from the European Union for the recovery. And as you know, each plan had to put the 20% of the budget on digital transition. We noticed that there was some attention in the plans about issues related to women, to young people, and also in two plans and in very mostly rhetorical way, there was attention also for marginal groups like Roma people. But we noticed also that these measures were not intersectional. They were always thinking in silos. The policies were all most of the time aimed to create new workforce. And the answer was always to quote Ellen Asper, to answer to how many and not to why and for whom. But the digital transition during the pandemic brought also opportunities. So as you know better than me, many services could survive, healthcare services, public services. And also there was this paradox because the digital divide was geographical. Many people in rural areas could not access services, but at the same time, many services that usually were made for people living in cities, now they became available also for people not living in the urban areas. And CSO, so civil society organizations, we had interviews with that what we call better stories of initiatives made by the civil society organizations. And many of them described the digital transition as an opportunity because they had the possibility on one side to improve the management inside the organization, and at the same time to keep contact with the users, their clients. And nowadays, most of them they say that they are keeping the digital channel in a hybrid form, so going together digital and remotely in offering services to vulnerable groups. In the image, you can see how the CSOs used digital tools during the pandemic, and it was mostly to offer information in the top left, so information on the websites. It was to offer courses, education, support in education, so guiding people. There were digital petitions made in order to collect and create critical masses in order to go against some policies that were not fair during the pandemic. And finally, the bottom right, you can find the quarter that is more dedicated to sharing, commoning. So when the platform, and we will have an example also with Jakub later, when the platforms were used to put people in contact and to create something together, and where the relation was mutual between those that were looking for help and those that were offering help. To conclude, some recommendation that you can find in the fact sheet is that the way that was starting in the National Recovery Plan to create education programs about digitalization is fine, but it's important to consider intersecting inequalities. We cannot avoid this reasoning. And by this way, it's important to put specific attention to rural and socioeconomic variables. Ministries in the government cannot reflect in silos, but it's important to collaborate in these topics because they connect different areas. It's not only about connection and about computers, but it's about structural problems that brings to these socioeconomic inequalities, and these are need to be considered. So the questions is who may and who may not benefit from social services. And finally, but it's also important, of course, digitalization, it's something good, but it's not a universal good. It's something that has to be considered also from a critical point of view. So this is what I would like to conclude with. And thanks a lot.
Thank you, Roberto. You can also look at the facts as Roberto said on the website of RESISTIRÉ, but also there are the posters just behind you if you want to have a look during the break or during lunch. Thank you. So we're moving on to the second part of the session, which is about innovative solutions. And I would like to introduce Tanya Maamari. Tanya is a digital inclusion coordinator for the Brussels Capital Region. She has a master's degree in political sciences, and she has developed an active career mainly in the fields of communication and events. In 2016, she started working for Paradigm, the public interest agency that aims to assist the local, regional, and community institutions within the Brussels Capital Region with a digital transformation. In 2019, she was appointed first digital inclusion coordinator for the Brussels Capital Region, and this role was created by the government in order to implement the digital inclusion strategy of the region and coordinate all the actions taken both by the public and private sectors alike. Tanya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everybody, and thanks for inviting me today. So just checking if it's working. Yeah, great. So I'm Tanya, as introduced, and I'm the Digital Inclusion Coordinator for Paradigm. This function has been created in 2018 by the first action plan, the first strategy of digital inclusion within the region. It has been created inside Paradigm. Paradigm is a public interest organization working on the digital transformation in the Brussels Capital Region. There are 8 pole like direction within Paradigm, and I'm working within the digital transformation direction. This digital transformation direction is aiming to settle the strategy of the digital transformation for the region. And it's quite maybe weird, but I think it's really interesting is that we have in this direction people working on IA, intelligence, artificial intelligence, geomatics, innovation, smart city, new ways of working, architecture, and also digital inclusion. So we put everybody around the table because we think that the digital transformation must really include all of that. So Belgium, as you know, maybe it's quite a complicated country. There are 3 regions, 3 communities. The communities are in charge of education, sports, everything that is related to the language. The regions are more in charge of infrastructures and so on. We have also the federal level and municipalities. So for the Brussels Capital Region, we have 1.2 million inhabitants, 19 municipalities. But what we can say is that the digital transition is a regional competence. So we are quite lucky with that. About digital inequalities, there is a barometer of the King Bartholin Foundation that is released every 2 years in Belgium. Here it was released in 2022, and it showed that digital inequalities that must be shown by 3 levels. The first level is the access to internet and the access to a computer. Here we see that 7% of the Brussels region population have no access to internet at home. So it's quite important still. The second level of the digital inequalities, it's more the capacity. So the capacity to use this computer, writing something in Word, sending an email with an attachment. So it's really basic IT competences. We don't ask everybody to be a geek, but still 33% of the Brussels region population is saying having low competences in IT, and 6% of the population is also non-users. So it makes 39% of the population who is really in the digital gap. The third level is the use. So it's the ability of the people having low IT competencies to be able to use public services online or just services online like e-banking, e-commerce, e-government, e-health, and so on. Here we see that depending of the essential services we are talking about, 19 to 52% of the, I said Belgian, but it's Brussels Capital Region population is not able to use the public services online and the essential services online. So we can say that in the Brussels Capital Regions, lots of actions have been taken since 2003. So we began quite a bit a few years ago, we can say, 20 years ago. We have, within Paradigm, tried to do lots of IT refurbished. So we gave computers to the population and to associations on the fields. We did also what we call Fiber to the School, which is a project to link all the schools in Brussels with the internet fiber. So they had a not low speed, but high speed connection to internet. We developed also Wi-Fi.Brussels. Now you have more than 200 hotspots in Brussels where you can connect to internet for free. We gave IT materials to the schools also. So that's where the actions that were taken, but it was a bit like this, block, a bit, yeah, one shot, we would say. In 2018, we started with the first digital inclusion strategy. It was really a plan. We created a label for the digital public spaces that are places that are helping people with their access, with also the use of the computers, that are giving trainings and so on. And so we created this label, a sort of network also for all these DPS. We did also we created the digital inclusion coordination within Paradigm. We did also communication campaign and so on to try to get the people within this digital transformation. And what we created, it's a working group. Now we have more than 250 participants in this public, in this working group from all the sectors. So public, private, academic, civil societies, and so on. It's really within the region. We have also created a broader ecosystem of everybody interested by digital inclusion. And here you have lots of logos of all the people in this. All together in this working group in 2019, so just before COVID, we created what we call the digital appropriation plan. Because of COVID, it was not directly presented to the government. They had other things to do, but in 2021, they got an agreement on this digital appropriation plan, which is really the digital strategy of the Brussels Capital Region. You can see there is 4 pillars, 17 projects, and 66 actions that we are leading in the Brussels Capital Region, raising awareness, because it's really important to get the people into this digital transition and to be able also to show them the benefits of the digital transition. Uniting, because it's important, lots of actions are taken, and it's important to coordinate all those actions so that we are not reinventing the wheel. Equipping the actors with materials, with trainers, trainings, and so on, and supporting the 6 publics that we found that are more into digital gap. So I won't go into the details because I don't have the time anymore, but you can see that indeed 66 actions to be taken in 4 years. It ends in 2024. We are already working with this working group on the next digital strategy plan. But what I think it's quite important is that, and I'm going to the fourth pillar, which is supporting the people. So we have seen that there are lots of people that are touched by digital inequalities, but they have all different needs, like job seekers. You see young people, because young people, they know how to put a video on TikTok, but actually sending an email with an attachment, it's quite difficult for them. So you have young people, but you have also senior citizens. You don't handle both of these public the same way. So we have created specific actions for each of those publics. We have, for example, one of the action was to distribute tablets in the care homes during the COVID, so that the old people could have still contacts with their family. And so we created these tablets with specific things on it, with manuals, so they could learn how to use it and so on. That's, yeah, sort of the actions that we are doing. And you see also the women, and it's always difficult for me to say that women are more in the digital gap than men. I see that there are lots of women here today. But yeah, the statistics are like that. And so we are working also with the federal level on women in digital strategy. We are working also with another public institution, which is in charge of a gender mainstreaming strategy, and so on and so on. And so it's quite important to work all together to be able to go further. What I give all the time the example of the Scandinavian countries that they didn't create in the 70s, they didn't create an ecological party, political party, the green parties, because they all thought, the politics, they all thought that ecology was important. So they put ecology in the political strategy of the parties, each one of them. Digital inclusion, it's the same. Digital inequalities, it's the same. Social inclusion, it's the same. We need to put that in all the strategy of the political parties, because it's important, and it's important to make the link also between the people. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you for keeping to the time. And 66 actions. You have a lot of work to do the next 4 years. Quite busy. So now we move on to the next innovative solution. So I'm going to introduce Jacob Mozarin, who is a researcher and social activist. During the pandemic, he was involved from the beginning in the activities of the mutual aid group, Visible Hand, as a facilitator and a person who prepared reports within its framework on the issues of organizing informal groups responding to social crisis. Jakob, the floor is yours.
Okay, check. Okay, so welcome everyone here. Good morning, and thank you very much for the very inspirational talks. Yesterday I came for the last panels, but it was very interesting. And you know how to use the design thinking in the social science. So for me as an engineer and a scientist, it's a very interesting thing how these tools can be used for the social change. But today I would like to talk about the visible hand. Visible hand. Visible Hand Mutual Aid Group, which is the group that exists from the March 2020 when the lockdown in Poland started. So this group now consists many, let's say, sub-chapters in all over the Poland, and all of them are informal mutual aid groups. It consists, it has like 130,000 members now online. The main group, the smaller ones are a bit smaller, like between 1,000 to 20,000 people. And it started, that's interesting. Like the thing is that I don't know, sorry. Okay, so what was the impulse for creating the mutual aid group in Poland? And in fact, from what I know, such network never existed before. And I think, in some Western countries, such groups exist. So for a long time. So for political and societal context in Poland, it's quite new, I can say, especially after the change in the governmental structure between the communism and the capitalism in Poland. So this change probably also created a big gap in the mutual aid. So, but going to the presentation, the impulse was the day the lockdown has started in Poland. Many people were in distress, and this distress was an impulse to create the first group. The first group was for the smaller number of people. It was like for like maybe 20, maybe 30 of friends who were, let's say, living in Warsaw, the capital city of Poland, but some of them, we can say, were kind of the vulnerable because, for example, they are immigrants from Belarus or from Ukraine. Some of them came from different towns and they didn't have the families around to support them. Some of them were supposed to go to the quarantine because of traveling. So the group was like, first, it started from the 50 people on Facebook group, as a Facebook group, and with very simple rules to support each other in the times of COVID-19. However, it quickly became a very popular group all over the Poland, mostly due to the media coverage. The media were very interested in such group and emerging group of mutual aid. And maybe also a little bit about the inspiration of the group. So go back a little bit to the history. So in fact, in Poland in 50s and 60s, there existed the network which was called Invisible Hand. And it was mostly for the young kids that were on the streets after the World War II, and they didn't have much facilities to play and possibilities to play with each other. So some people said, okay, so maybe we can try to, let's say, find something interesting for them. So they started to do some anonymous work and anonymous mutual aid actions for the other people. And in the peak of this group or of this network, there were probably 1 million of kids involved in Poland. So it was in 50s and 60s, and after that, for me, for example, it was very interesting, and yes, I always wanted to be in a group like this one, right? Like doing the good stuff for people as a gang of teenagers. So it was quite cool. And but in fact, it was very, very, let's say, inspirational for people in Poland nowadays. So during the COVID, the group for example, only in March, the number of people in the group increased from the 20 people to 10,000 people. In 3 months, the situation stabilized on the level of 100,000 people in the main group, but also a lot of, like, let's say, actions, the actions undertaken by the members, not only online, but also in the real world. I mean, the people really wrote about the needs, not only like how they can help, but, we decided as the admin, like the moderators of the group, we decided to put more emphasis on the needs of people. So we really encourage people to write about their needs, not only what kind of the help they can provide. So, and it started working, and people really got a lot of support from the from the others. So here are some numbers, but also some numbers which probably are interesting for you within this context and within this conference. So this is the number of let's say, the division by gender in the main group, but also it also scales to the smaller groups all over Poland. So more like 80% of people on the group are writing that they are women, and only 25%, 20% is plus minus 5% are men. I'm not saying that, you know, offline they don't support, and probably the numbers are a bit different when we are talking about like the actions, but you know, online mostly women are active, especially women within this probably here, right? Within this span, like between 25, 45 year old women. And okay, so I will go a bit further. Okay, so here, after the first emergence of the group, many other groups were created in different cities. Nowadays, we have probably 100 groups all over the Poland. Some of them are abroad, but probably not as active as before. And also, what is very important here, that the groups are open, and also the people who are using the groups are the people from different communities, but also from the vulnerable groups like elderly people or kids. And what is also important here, that the actions were really answering the problem of the crises. So here are some actions like the sewing masks for the public health institutions when they were struck by the COVID, and there were a lack of the masks in Poland. So we had to do themselves by ourselves. Here are some information about the schooling and education, which was also supported by the Visible Hand groups, help for the hospitals and help for the people, for homeless people. We were cooperating as the main group with the Food Not Bombs groups, which are some anarchist groups providing food for homeless people. And what more? Here are some struggles that we are facing. So mostly the fraud and cyberbullying are the most important ones that we are trying to avoid, and we really have the very strict policies against them. And what we observe, that we have something like the structure, we can observe the patterns, how we can create the mutual aid groups. And with the help, of course, of media and media coverage, I think was very, very important part of this. And also what I want to say, that we were thinking, okay, this will be for the COVID, but then another crisis started, right? In Poland, we had the huge amount of the migrants from Ukraine, war refugees, like the millions of people. And in fact, the Visible Hand support network was like, we had like 30,000 more people in few days, and they were organizing themselves in the small towns with providing help for people from Ukraine. So on the train stations, providing accommodation, providing food, and so on. So I think this is interesting patterns that we can observe here, and probably there is much more to research on. So I really encourage you to research on this kind of the groups. I can provide you later some statistics from Facebook that I have, but also there are also some other, like a lot of like the interviews, papers, scientific papers, and so on covering the group. So probably it will be quite interesting for you later. So I'm open for this to provide you some more information. And that's all for now. And thank you once more for the invitation.
Thank you, Jakob. Really inspiring example, and actually really I really like the historical background. I didn't know that this was kind of going back in time, and really motivational, you know, to be started with kids and kind of supporting kids, and then how you took it over. Amazing story. So we're going to move on to the third part now of the session, and I'm going to invite all the speakers, please, to join me here. And I want to introduce two new people that you haven't met before. So one is Sergio Perez Barranco. He's a project officer at the ANTRA, the European Federation of National Organizations working with the homeless. He works on EU free movement, migration and homelessness within the project, protecting the rights of destitute mobile EU citizens and on digitalization. So, and the next person I would like to introduce is Christian Morabito. Christian is an international researcher and expert with more than 15 years of experience in the field of inequalities and educational policies. During the course of his career, he has worked with the United Nations, OECD, and the European Commission in managing and evaluating education and social policies reforms, policies, and programs. He holds a PhD in social welfare studies from Ghent University, and he's currently working as a senior researcher for Save the Children Italy, for which he has developed the index for educational poverty. So if Tanya, Sergio, Jacob, and Christian can join me here. Hello. Right. So we heard a lot today about, the RESISTIRÉ findings, about inequalities, about opportunities, about issues, but also some inspiring solutions. And I wanted to ask you first, what are, in your opinion, and based on your experience actually and your role, the most prominent inequalities in the process of digital transition related to the pandemic? And I want to give the floor maybe to Sergio or Christian. I don't know who wants to go first. No, he has talked already. Like to.
Working, yes. Thank you so much for the invitation. Okay, I will start with because I will talk about Italy, but it could be a good case for other countries. Just to give you a brief understanding of the situation in Italy, educational poverty is very high in general. So you have like 40% of early school leavers, which is really high, steady, doesn't move for 5 years, and 25% of students do not reach the minimum competencies in mathematics, reading, and something like that. So of course, COVID-19 increased this, and of course, I mean, most of the students that do not reach the competency are those in low socioeconomic status. So this has increased due to COVID-19, basically because school closure and many students did not have access to tablets, connections, etc., etc. I mean, the National Statistical Institute estimated that 12% more or less didn't have access, but this increased to 20% in southern regions, which are also the regions where more social economic disadvantaged families live, and that's created this increase in inequality. So that's the status, but with Save the Children Italy, we start raising other questions. There's not only inequality in access to devices, but also inequality in the capacity of using properly the devices. So we created basically a test, which we call ABCD, which is in Italian is, I mean, I can translate, is basically basic digital competency assessment, something like that. And we tested to try to understand, because we wanted to go beyond the mere typical digital skills that we try to understand. Like, I mean, I don't know, how do you use a computer, to open a Word document, to work, this kind of things. Okay, that component is there, but we try to go beyond and look at 3 other dimensions. One is the being in the digital space. So how do you create your own image? And if you understand the space between your private image and the public, so how do you show yourself? You create yourself in a digital space. And of course, what are the legal boundaries for that? And also the other vis-a-vis the others. So if you understand, how to treat the image of the others, and also how to do not discriminate in the digital space. Of course, then when it's a severe issue is cyberbullying, etc., but just, also on how you treat the other in the digital space. And of course, the 4th component is how do you use the digital space to understand the world? And if you don't, meaning that you are victim of manipulation or you don't understand the fake news or something like that. So when we look at the data, it was really surprising because, okay, in terms of classical digital skills, we found more or less the same thing that the international based competencies assessment found, but we go a little further, and I give you some data because they're really interesting. So 10% were not able to identify secure passwords. So we were giving like a password 1, 2, 3, 4, they say that's good. 15% were unable to share a screen during a video call, and that are children that use technology because they were forced to use during COVID-19. They're not the one that did not have access. 30% more or less were unable to download a file from a school platform or to find, in the browser, a specific session. So we really give them examples. Okay, reply, but that was much related to social economic status. So low socioeconomic status, of course, less access to digital device, less able, let's say, to use this device correctly for classical digital skills. But what we found out that was really most interesting and somewhat shocking, it was about the other dimension. Because like 30% around think that the minimum age to be in TikTok or this kind of things is much lower than 13 years old. Some say there's no age. So you can go, anytime there. So they were not aware of it. 30% same did not know the necessary steps like in social media to make your profile basically private, so not accessible to others. 56% do not know legal implication of sharing offensive contents, especially vis-a-vis the others. And 1 in 5, 46% were not able to recognize a fake news. We actually use a real fake news. Because during COVID-19, there was this fake news circulating in Italy, probably in other countries, of an ambulance going around the city, apparently empty because there was a scam, all right? And they couldn't recognize there was a fake. So, and this is across social economic status. So you don't have a division. So it means that both children from low socioeconomic families or high as the same. And that's even more complicated because it means that it's widespread. And parents also probably, if we did the same test to parents, most probably will have the same results. So what we found out is, okay, clearly the first level of problem is access to devices. And we're still having these problems in many parts of the countries, especially the part with low disadvantage or low income family lives. But the problem is it is much more widespread if the fact that the correct use is not there yet. And it's even more complicated in thinking that basically children right now develop themselves in the digital world, basically in the virtual world, more than in the real world sometimes. They have no idea how to create boundaries, no idea how to use it, no idea how, this can manipulate them. And that is particularly, scaring. And of course, COVID-19, emergence of that because we start looking for the first time, but the route is still, very long too, because we're usually looking at classical competencies. We don't go beyond that to see things that are even more important for the child development.
Great, thank you. So very interesting about the children. Some concerning statistics there that we need to be aware of. How about Sergio? How about the homeless and the work you're doing?
So, well, I work for Fianza. As Carola said, we are a European Federation of organizations working with the homeless. So we don't work directly with people in homelessness, but we represent the organizations that in every country do work with these people, and we basically lobby the European institutions for the rights of these people. And our members have been working for a long time in the issue of digitalization because, well, as we see every day, like it is more and more present in our daily lives. Like right now, I think that every day, like almost all of us connect to the internet one way or another, use internet or digital technologies to do very basic things like look for a recipe, talk with our relatives, look for a job, look for accommodation. etc. And this is also the case for people in homelessness. Like they also need to use devices to connect with the relatives in the case that they are migrants, for example. For families, basically women living in shelters with their children, they need to use technology in order to help their children. And many other cases. So basically, answering to your question, first of all, we must say that homelessness has many faces. You can be sleeping rough, which is like the most serious situation. You can also be in temporary accommodation. Asylum seekers in hotspots in Southern Europe are also people in homelessness. As I said before, like women victims of domestic violence, or even people also sofa surfing with friends or relatives. So depending on every situation, of course, you have different challenges and different opportunities as well for digital transition. And regarding this, one of the main inequalities that we see for people in homelessness is basically the lack of access to equipment in a continuous, in a regular, in a stable way. Like some things that we take for granted because we have a stable housing situation and we have a income to pay bills and to pay for utilities and so on. People in homelessness don't necessarily have it. Like, for example, being able to charge our phones, being able to pay for data plans, being able to connect with others in a daily basis. There are not many studies across Europe on this issue, but one study made in France, like some years ago, said that only 50% of the people they asked, so people in homelessness that they asked, used internet every day. And while maybe if I ask the people here in the room, the percentage would be close to 100%. So this says a lot about one of the main inequalities that is overlooked in the digital transition, which is the socioeconomic inequalities, and as part of that, the housing deprivation. And so I really liked when Roberto said in his presentation that not we, but politicians tend to think about digital transition as a universal good, but actually it can exclude like many people. So when you create from governments, when you create these digital by default services, you can actually be excluding many people from accessing public administration, which actually should be like a right that is granted for all. Like there is also another study for France developed by the High Council for Social Work, saying that at least 20% of people could not do like administrative procedures without any kind of support, just autonomously. When we think about that, it's 20% of people who could be deprived of using the services that they are paying for in their taxes. So yeah, basically, I think that we need to put our attention more on those people that are in the low income segments of the population, those people that are the most excluded, migrants, asylum seekers, people in homelessness, because digital transition affects them all. They also can benefit from digital transition, but it doesn't have to be like a missed opportunity. With the proper resources, with the proper knowledge, with the proper collaboration, we can actually address these digital inequalities.
Thank you, Sergio. And actually, it's you make a nice point about politicians, and my next question is about decision makers. So what can decision makers and actually public administration learn from civil society organizations in terms of mitigating these inequalities? Who would like to take that? Tanya?
I might. Yeah. I just wanted to add about intersectionality is that all the studies that I've read, and I think that all the studies that have been done and on the problem of digital inequalities shows that there are lots of factors for being in the digital gap, not having access, not having the basic IT competencies and so on. Those factors are, for example, age, gender, income, education, the family situation. Are you living alone or not? The socio-economical situation, the handicap, also the people with disabilities and so on. So it's not something that you are, I mean, you're not making policy or you are not trying to make stuff, actions, if you are not considering all those aspects, because as I said previously, it's lots of different people with lots of different needs, and the actions must be as complex as the complexity of the situation. So it's quite important that everybody is working together. What I can see in politics, I'm looking to the, okay, I don't see any. What I can see in the public services. So I'm working for a public service, and I see that we are not really independent. We have a minister, we have a government, and are trying to make their way. The politics must speak together. The government, all the people in the government, they must speak all together. It's not always the case. I mean, in some good governments that are doing that, it's not always the case, but it's quite important not to say, okay, I'm going to do this strategy because it's good for the next elections. I'm going to do this strategy because it's good for the population and it's good for the citizen I'm trying to help. And that's a bit of a thing. I don't know where you are all coming from, but I think that in the democracy of our days, it's quite difficult to implement that. So yeah, what we can do as public administration is do some research, working with the CSOs, with the civil society and so on, to be able to present some strategy and some actions plan that reflects the needs of the population on the field. And so that's, we can show them, okay, we need to do that because it's a real need from the population. So yeah, working with a working group, we have created this working group on basis of the what we call the, actually I don't know the name in English. Anyway, it's a principle in the smart city development that you must work with the academic sector, the public sector, the private sector, enterprises and so on, and the citizens. And you need to put everybody around the same table to know what are the needs of everybody, what are the studies, what are the numbers and so on, and statistics. And so we did that with this working group, and it's quite interesting because you see certain things that are coming up. Not everybody agrees, but it's quite a bit challenging sometimes. But it's quite interesting to be able to work like that, so that you are able to find solution to all this public in an intersectional way also.
Thank you. Roberto?
The quadruple helix, that's it.
I don't know, who would like to go next, maybe? What can decision makers learn from CSOs? Jakob? Yeah.
I don't think I will talk about the CSOs. I don't know if the visible hand is the CSO. I find it more like the informal group, but I think what decision makers can learn from the groups like this one is that the support for the thing is that the informal group, mutual aid informal group, is the group that works on the very low level, very low level, and it's very flexible, so it can answer the problem very fast. And when you talk about the digitization, because I think it's also an important part here, I think the peer support here is very important. In fact, what I see from the students, because I also work with students at university, they learn much faster when they talk with each other about solving the problem, not as the teacher, for example, give them some solutions and talk about some solutions. They don't understand it. And probably, let's say that you have the book from the RESISTIRÉ, it's open and so on. But the thing is that probably not so many people will read it. I wish, they will. But the thing is that somebody should encourage them to do this and say, this is a great thing. This is very useful. It can save you a lot of time and a lot of money. And usually these are not the government or an organization, but probably your friends and your family. So I think this is very important for the decision makers to understand this kind of the peer support. And also and also I wanted to add something about the privileges. The thing is that when you talk about the privileges, you're talking a lot about there is this very, very famous exercise when you just do the step forward and step forward and step forward and look back. And probably every decision maker should make this kind of exercise with his friends, her friends.
So, the privilege walk.
Privilege walk.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you so much. Looking forward now, what are the top priorities in terms of Christian? Please.
Wanted to add something because I think that civil society organization can do, in my view, two things really important. The first is reaching out the most marginalized. That's what, in general, the public hardly does. Example, Save the Children in Italy, when there was the peak of the crisis, Italy was hit first by COVID-19, and they closed the school immediately. And they reached out 15,000 teachers and children by providing devices. That was the immediate to do in very in marginalized area where the public could not react so fast. And secondly, they can experiment, because in general, sorry, but it's true, the public sector, in order to experiment, you have to pass from, the minister agrees, and then the administration, and then the other side, and then the other side. While NGOs, sometimes the civil society can go fast and try to, especially in these difficult areas. For instance, we started a project which is Digital Connections precisely after that study to try to reach out marginalized students and build new competencies, not only traditional, but also in this area that I was discussing before. And they're reaching out now, I think, 6,000 students in 400 schools, creating also newsroom in order to experiment a pedagogy that looks at a digital as cross-cutting, not just a subject. So that you, for example, in this digital room, children learn how to do podcast, so how to create things, so how to use the tools, but for what? For instance, to avoid manipulation. So they create projects like to use podcasts to explain, fake news, or so that's things that civil society organizations can do, because they can innovate, they can try, but then of course it's the public that they have to take over and, let's say, mainstream all these practices. Also the practice on how to reaching out fast, the most vulnerable, so the one that are behind, and you create the digital divide. That's just...
Thank you so much, Christian. So last question, looking forward, what are the top priorities in terms of ensuring inclusive digitalization? what can be done from different stakeholders, policymakers, CSOs, informal groups to effectively change policies and the process. A big one.
Yeah, I think that the keywords are, there is a thin line about what we heard here. There is the fact that CSOs can, of course, support because they are the point of reference on the community, on the territory, so they can bring the digital to those that don't have that. At the same time, we were discussing also yesterday, CSOs are not the solution for what public is not doing. So there is this thin line that we have not to pass. And at the same time, the keyword I think is hybrid. So we realize that digital tools can offer a lot of good opportunities. At the same time, we have always to keep in mind that it's not the only solution, but because we will always miss to involve somebody if we don't keep a channel that is the remote real life.
Thank you, Roberto.
I think there are some top priorities. One of these priority is to sensibilize the people about the digital transformation and digital way to do stuff. I don't think that the computers will disappear tomorrow. Technology is going to increase even more. We have seen the acceleration with the COVID-19 crisis, but it's still going on and it's not going to stop. So we need to sensibilize the people also about the opportunities, but also the risks of internet and so on, and to really bring them into this digital train that is not, it's not a train anymore. It's like I don't know what it is, but it goes quite faster than a train. The second priority, I think, is to make sure that all that is put online is accessible to everybody. We see that there are European norms about accessibility, but we need to go a bit further than that, especially for the public services that are online. The public services should stay accessible for everybody and for all the citizens. And it's not only something about WCAG norms for people with disabilities. It's also about ergonomy, making it simpler easy to surf into the platforms and so on. And then there is a real work to do about this. And yeah, great. And so, yeah, and still speak with the civil society because they are the only one, I think, that are really aware of the needs of the people we need to help.
Sorry, and I have to say, I mean, from a RESISTIRÉ perspective, you know, the CSOs and informal groups and all these initiatives for us have been so crucial to understand better what's happening on the ground. And actually we saw, I mean, personally, I found that RESISTIRÉ gave me a lot of opportunity to actually explore that and actually say that we need to come together much more. Academia needs and research needs to come together much more with kind of, you know, informal groups and try to help each other and provide capacity potentially to these organizations, you know, that they don't have to analyze, collect data and actually learn from each other. So it's even from an academic perspective, it's a crucial lesson learned. Yeah.
Yeah, also related to what you were just saying, I would say that the top priority would be like more collaboration between all the relevant actors. Because when you try to find some research or some data about how digital transition affects people in homelessness or people in other like very vulnerable social groups or exclusion, actually there is not so much. There is much more about digital inequalities for women and older people, because of course, like they are a bigger part of the population, and yeah, their needs also need to be addressed. But if we don't have research on how other groups are impacted, then these groups will be overlooked and they will be behind this transition. So I would say, yeah, the more collaboration between academia, civil society, public administration. Like one example also, like now in Brussels, you talked about these public digital spaces. I think it's something that was born in France, like Espace Public Numérique, maybe, yeah, and was imported later to Belgium. It's very useful for many people that maybe don't have internet or computers at home. But for example, people in homelessness who could actually benefit from this service, they don't usually go. Why? Because they are afraid. They are afraid of facing stigma by other people, by the public administration there. They don't have like no one like supporting them, so they rely on the organizations at local level that support them, that provide them with shelter, with food, with psychosocial support, and so on. So one thing that could be done from public administration was, instead of being more passive, just creating an equipment or service, or even delivering tablets, which was done at the beginning of the pandemic, is for public services to be more active. So, okay, let's go to these places. Let's go to the headquarters of NGOs, to the, the street work that is done there. And let's talk with the social workers that are dealing with situations, and then you can collaborate better, and each one of the services can provide their expertise. Yeah.
Thank you. Christian?
I think, I mean, I'm just focusing on children and students. There are three main priorities that we have to look at. First of all is clearly, I mean, giving access to technology for those who do not have. It should be good to have a special funds for that, maybe, like a sort of student kit for some children that they do not have possibility of getting this type of technologies to get them. The second is, that's access. The second is use. So in school, the main issue is curricula. So the curricula is school, in general, either they do not treat digital education properly, or they just focus on some specific, let's already talked about it, classical digital basic competencies. So they don't go beyond that. And it should be. There are some countries are working on it. For instance, Finland is working hardly on recognizing fake news or manipulation. That should be done. And this, I mean, it's basically, you think about also media literature, how you build citizenship, digital citizenship, all this type of education beyond the classical competencies about yourself, treating others, or recognizing what is right or what is fake, etc., etc. For that, you have to train, of course, teachers, because are not prepared. We are not prepared in general. I mean, for dealing with the school closure and doing e-learning, and that's even a step even more forward. But that should be done. And you can also work with the civil society at community level to bring that also to parents, especially in very difficult areas. So you can, create a sort of digital educational community based on the school, but with children and parents. That's what we did. That a third level, in my view, is very important, is regulation. Because, okay, we can access the digital world. We can maybe know through education how to use it, but there should be rules that should be imposed. And I say imposed to the providers and private providers. We have the digital act, the intelligence, artificial intelligence act, that's fine. But they're missing some points that are crucial for children, which is age verification, for instance, the use of everything, data profiling for children, for advertising, or examples, the neuronal type of messagings for getting children to use this tool. Or for instance, then you give rewards when gaming, for instance, you do rewards. More time you spend, more rewards you have, which is very bad for children. or the discriminatory algorithm or algorithm that allows a child in any case to see violent comments or, arms or this kind of thing. This should be, we have to find a way to ban that, to regulate that for children. That's fundamental. And also to assess the effect, the impact. There was a very famous study that was uncovered by, now is Meta, Facebook at the time, that they were looking at Instagram and effects on girls' image, and it was devastating. But that was, try to hide. But that things that civil society, organizations, government should create this working group to study impact and ask private providers, platform to deal with it and review it. That could be also something that, that's all things that you can do only at European level, my view. Regulations. But in terms of, at the impact, of course, because cannot ask Belgium to do it with Meta, that is a multinational company. That should be a European initiative, gathering civil society, NGOs, policymakers, and assess how regulations are implemented. Also assess, for instance, how participatory are the algorithms that they're going to make in order to avoid discrimination or targeting children for purposes that we don't like, and also the impact of this, because that's crucial. That will be part. It is missing at the moment. So we need to work on it, at least on the child side.
Great points. Thank you so much, Christian. And I think I want to pick up a bit about what you said about the role of teachers, not being trained, not being prepared, the involvement of parents. And there were things that we picked up actually in one of the recommendations, the fact about developing resilient education systems. And it was very useful for us. You kind of reflected upon that. Please check the fact sheet as well at the back. So I think I'm going to open now the floor maybe for some questions and some comments from the audience. Are there any particular, Maria? Oh, thank you, Pasi.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much for the interventions. Going back to what Sophia was saying yesterday about the role of market in gender-based violence, for example, when we are talking about digital transformation, the role of companies is key. And we haven't talked about this. And we recently heard about OpenAI, for example, lobbying against the AI Act, regulating, and as Christian was saying, on AI in Europe. So what do you think should be the role, or how can we limit the role of companies when we are talking about inclusive digital transformation?
There are lots of rules, indeed, regarding digital. The Brussels Capital Region is working on a new rule to try to create a framework around the digitalization and the digital transformation. There are principles in the European Union, digital first, and so on. Now we are talking also about the digital rights of the citizens. But it's true that there are lots of framework for the moment, and it should have. As you said, we need to really take that into account, the fact that it needs to have some rules and limits and boundaries, what we can do, and that's the limits of where we cannot go further. In the Brussels Capital Region, what we decided to do is to put digital inclusion into this rule. We call that an ordonnance in French, but it's a fact that it's okay to go to the digital, but you need to be able to make it accessible. You need to have a physical locket. You need to have alternatives for the people who cannot go digitally and so on and so on. And the digital transformation should also be done in a way that it's more accessible, with administrative simplification, with lots of rules like that. So it's a big, the big deal for the moment in the Brussels Capital Region with this rule, because not everybody understands it. People think that it's, oh, we are going more digital, but it's no, it's saying, okay, everybody is going digital. So now we need to put a framework around it to be sure that this digital way to do stuff doesn't increase again the digital gap and the digital inequalities of the people. But yeah, you're right. We should do more.
Okay, so I just wanted to say that when you asked about the involvement of the companies think about the profit, right? So if you say that to them, okay, you can make much bigger profit by making regulations and frameworks, then probably they will start working with you. But if you will not do this, probably they will not. So because they think about the like making money, and they don't think about like who is using the solutions and how. So I think that's one of the things that probably they should be somehow involved in these regulations and making these regulations, and also think, you know, how these regulations can be profitable for them. But I think it's a very hard question to answer.
Or eventually make it the other way around. I was thinking how we can harm them eventually. So if you don't follow regulation, you're gonna lose money. I mean, in my view, the problem, we have three problems here. The first is that your basis, basically, I mean, your public opinion is not prepared about understanding the risks. I mean, when I see my data of the youth, which supposedly should be the generation digital, I mean, compared and should be aware, they are not. So we really need to work on education of, 360 degrees from family to children, because if they understand how to correctly use, they can also understand the risks. That's the first point in my view. But the second will be, okay, once you do that, you can already be prepared to start talking about this risk openly. Like we did with the environmental issues. There was this link, I like it, on the environment that you made. So that you say, I mean, making public what damage creates an industry that does not follow environment rules. In this case, what damage creates an industry that does not follow some rules to protect you and your data. The reports of Meta was shocking. So they did not make it public, and it was made public only because the US Senate asked that and disclosed. And they made a huge, a huge issue, because it was really, many girls going to, medications for depression and this kind of things because of image, Instagram, and stuff like that. So if we spread this information and culture, we already maybe create first a public opinion that might be informed. So if this is informed, you cannot hide, and therefore the political level must act. But then you have to have also spaces where this can make it really public and kind of governance and transparency and control. That's why when I say we need to have an official working group at European level, that whenever we discuss that, but not just the legislation that you consult the NGOs and then you don't get it. I mean, to monitor the legislation, monitor implementation, like, an institutional group in which you have also parents representative and NGOs that look at regulations. So you have like a space where these issues that maybe, hopefully, will look at public opinion, will make public, so to say, look, first of all, you have to follow these regulations. The impact is this, that you have to do it. And be careful, because that make it public. The people are aware, And if you don't follow, if you create harm to children, that's surely you're gonna lose money. That's something that we probably could do, but it's complicated, but it's building. Environment started this movement like 30 years ago. So we need to work on it.
Any other comments? Yes, Mika?
Yeah, thank you very much for again a very wonderful panel with very smart and kind people. So I want to hear more about your strategies because as you showed very clearly, and we've seen that also yesterday, that CSOs can reach the most marginalized, right? This is one of the elements of the project. But this, of course, also dependent upon the context in which you are, because in some cases, the most marginalized might be formally excluded. Trans people can be formally excluded, being homeless can be made illegal. There's many undocumented migrants are illegal in many other countries. So my question to the panel is, how do you navigate this obstacle? Did you come across it? How do you strategically deal with that? And if you want to ask for stopping the live streaming on this, then maybe you can be more honest even. But that's a question in my mind, right?
Important question. Would like to take it? No.
I think that as you mentioned, it's the most important is not to be in a building. It's to go outside the building, to go on the streets, and to go to the meeting of those people who are in need. Whether it is through NGOs, whether it is through civil society, whether it is through schools or through, I don't know, home cares, hospitals. It's trying to find some link within the society to be able to reach the people. That is quite important. And it's true that going in the streets or for some association going into schools to bring IT into schools and not saying, okay, we can have like camps for children on Wednesday afternoon. No, we are going to the schools, and during the school hours, we are teaching them how to do that. It's a way to be able to offer it to everybody. And not especially the ones who know about the camps on Wednesday afternoon, for example. It's really being able to reach more people by going more mobile also.
Yeah, I would say regarding this, you raised a very important question about marginalized groups like trans people or homeless people, or undocumented people. So even if these groups like lack in general access to the mainstream public services because of different reasons. For undocumented people, maybe they are not allowed. For trans people or for homeless people, it can be stigma, or it can be just difficult to connect with public servants. But they rely on NGOs and civil society and community organizations because that's where they seek support. So public services here, instead of having a promoter role, they should have more like a supporter role. So, for example, what we see in many homeless shelters, they usually have some IT equipment, but it's usually outdated. Sometimes it doesn't work. It's definitely not enough for all the needs of all the people that they support. Maybe workers don't have the right skills to teach people in need these skills. So in this case, public services could have this supporting role, could provide this new IT equipment, could provide specific trainings for these workers, could could improve internet connection, for example, because in some cases it's not enough. It happened, for example, for families in shelter accommodation, that there was some internet connection, but when children had to move online because the schools were closed, suddenly maybe you have connection that is stable for 5 students, but not for the 50 children that are going to take online classes. So the internet system breaks down. So yeah, this kind of resources are useful, and we can see that, for example, there is a lack of awareness of these issues in most of the strategies. For example, when we talk about digital education, there was a European strategy that focused mainly on schools, which is super important. But there are so many organizations providing non-formal education, either at the NGOs or at public libraries, etc. And they are not part of the strategy, so they cannot benefit from these investments in improving connection, for example.
Okay, so can I add something here? So I think there are like different things here in what you asked about different vulnerable groups. And I think the very important thing that sometimes we forget about it, that these groups within themselves, they create the support groups. So that's the thing, that probably we should spot the support group that they create formally or informally within themselves. That's the first thing. The second thing is that if you talk and provide support and help for them, you are not the savioring them, but you are either the servant or the partner. So that's the very important thing. And sometimes, many people, including me, forget about it. So for example, I work, let's say, with the group that supports the migrants who cross the border with Belarus, between the Belarus and Poland. And frankly speaking, local people who are living in the Podlasie region, they created support groups for them. So they provide shelter, even if some people can say it's illegal. They provide the shelter for people on the move so they can safely wait for the transport to Germany or to the western part of the Europe. So they have created the network that supports the group. So the thing is that the network is not, it can't be even legalized, right? But they created the support group because that what is happening is affecting the whole society. They face the problem every day for last year or even more longer, like last year and a half, now probably 2 years. So this is their everyday. So they have to create the support group. So I think the support groups, they emerge within the communities. And the thing is that policymakers should somehow like try to just find them, spot them, and try to treat them as partners in their policymaking. So.
Right, thank you so much. I mean, so many great takeaways, important points. I just want to thank you for your interventions, also for all the work you're doing, and the support you provide. It's fantastic. It's been very inspiring. I just want to close just to actually inspired by Christian ABCD test. I'm going to give my ABCD takeaways from this panel. And A is ask politicians to do a privileged work, maybe. B, bring together all the stakeholders. C, consider complex needs when you're designing inclusive strategies. And D, do not take for granted that CSOs would step in to, kind of meet the gaps of the government. So thank you.
Many thanks, Sharia. Many thanks to all of you for these inspiring examples and thought-provoking discussion.